RSVP list, and I noticed people were actually traveling from other states. How many people were from outside of the state of Kentucky? That's amazing. Shout out some states. Mississippi, hey. Tennessee, we got an Ohio over here. Indiana, all the way across the river, right? Well done. And Michigan, well done. Thank you for coming. We appreciate it. The Frazier History Museum is the official starting point of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. And what that means basically is three things. We have the Kentucky Bourbon Trail Welcome Center, which you all came through on your way in, and that is a concierge service for all bourbon tourism in the state of Kentucky, where there were well over 1.5 million visits last year just to come taste our bourbon. So everybody has a different budget. They have a different amount of time. They have different likes. So our staff helps you to curate your visits, and that happens on the first floor here. The second component is the Spirit of Kentucky Bourbon exhibition on the third floor. How many of you got a chance to go up there? You like? Enjoyed it? Good. That's about the category, the culture of bourbon, the families, the history, why 95% of the bourbon in the world comes from the state of Kentucky and 100% of the good bourbon comes from the state of Kentucky. So that's phase two, and the third phase is this. It is this programming here at the Frazier. We do these kind of programs every month, often 2 times a month. We've got some information on the table back there about our next program. So this one's sold out. Make sure you look into the next one if you have a good time tonight. Tonight's is Chateau Bourbon. Thank you for the food. Art Eatable Small Batch Bourbon Truffles. Thank you for the delicious chocolates. And thank you to our partners at Masterson's who always do a great job for us. We appreciate it. Without further ado, I'm the host. The star of the show is Trey Zoeller. Trey, come on out.
Hello. How's it going? Thank you.
So we're gonna sit down and we are going to tell stories tonight. And this is a remarkable, amazing story about this brand. But I'm a guy who believes that good stories are told over a drink. So why don't we enjoy our first Jefferson Reserve, and Trey, why don't you tell us about the launch of this overall brand and what you had in mind in starting this?
Okay, well, I'm first going to tell you, thanks a lot for traveling. Some of you all traveled a lot of miles, not quite as many miles as those barrels did, but still a damn long way, so we appreciate that. We're going to tell you a little bit about why we got into it and why we wanted to do this journey. And it so much coincides with what's going on here at the Frazier Museum, and not only what's going on inside of these walls, but what happened right at the banks of the Ohio right here, and why this is Whiskey Row, and why we decided to do this reenactment, which is what it is. But I'm going to first describe the bourbon in front of you just so you have a baseline and you have to know where we're starting, and then we can talk about where we're going. My dad and I started this company 20 years ago, and our first product launch was Jefferson's Reserve. We now have 19 different expressions of Jefferson. 17 of those 19, we do something different than what most people do when they're distilling. Besides just distilling, aging, cutting to proof, and bottling, we are manipulating the maturation process one way, shape, or form. So we're trying to push the boundaries of what bourbon is without bastardizing it, and always kind of tipping our hat to what the traditions of bourbon are all about. So what you have here in front of you is our Jefferson's Reserve. And out of those 19 expressions, I would say this is our most quintessential bourbon. We take 4 different bourbons and blend them together. Our base bourbon comprises about 65% of the total, and the reason I'm doing that is because I feel like the whole is better than the parts. So as you're drinking this, you're going to get a very complex, very flavorful, sophisticated bourbon. And that'll be a nice baseline to kind of go from where, and tell you of how this whole industry has evolved into getting it to that point.
So let's toast to Trey and the Jefferson Reserve and his father, Chet.
Yeah,
you're here.
Chet, you bet. Cheers.
All right, let's take a journey, shall we? Yep. So We first started talking about this project, I don't know, a year plus ago, and we were up in our President Penny Peebler's office. And, you know, I was fascinated by this whole concept that is based in history, right? I mean, the idea came from what happened 150 years ago.
Absolutely. And as we just toasted, especially to my dad, I benefit a lot. My dad's a bourbon historian. He and his brother were Kentucky historians originally. My uncle had the largest library on Kentucky history anywhere in the country. And by reading some of the stories in his books, he's got one chapter dedicated to how bourbon was originated here, or how whiskey was taken from Kentucky and disseminated across the United States, and how he talks about that journey and why Whiskey Row appeared the way that it did, and how there were barrels coming from all over, you know, wherever the river system stretched, you know, from Pennsylvania to Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, how it would all congregate here on the banks of the falls of the Ohio and collect here. And then a lot of the times the bourbon was put together or mingled and then put on flatboats and took a really dangerous journey down to disseminate so that the farmers here could turn their cash crop, corn, into something profitable for them. And as he discovered over thousands of distilleries here in Kentucky in the 1800s, it really showed how not only those distilleries prospered, but the towns around them. Owensboro is a great example. It was the cottage industries outside of bourbon that grew up and produced these river towns that made Kentucky what it is today.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is this journey as it is hasn't been taken before your project in probably 150 years, right? They stopped doing it because they didn't have to do it anymore, but then you lost what made whiskey bourbon.
Absolutely. And so I had a couple of hypotheses, and this is why I attempted to do this. And one reason they didn't do it, because it was very dangerous. And this, I guarantee you, is the most costly bourbon ever made and bottled. It was a pain in the ass and very expensive, but well worth it along the way. Hopefully you'll think so when you try it as well. But it was. In my mind, we have a product called Jefferson's Ocean, where we take mature bourbon that's distilled and aged in Kentucky. We put it on ships and we send it to 30 ports on 5 continents, crossing the equator 4 times, which brings very different flavors out. And some people say it tastes like salted caramel popcorn. And as I tried this, I thought about it, and I thought that the people that were drinking the whiskey that ended up on the East Coast that was distilled here in Kentucky, that whiskey must taste much more like Jefferson's Ocean than bourbon that's typically distilled and aged here in Kentucky. My other thought about it was, why Kentucky? Why is 95% of the bourbon from Kentucky, or all the good bourbon from Kentucky, when it's made with basically the same ingredients, and a lot of the other neighboring states have some of the same advantages that we do? And I thought about it, when people started distilling on the western slope of the Appalachian Mountains, and they did that to escape the tax man, as the first tax in the United States was a whiskey tax. So the distillers wanted to go far enough away or outside the reach of the tax man, and they started distilling on the western slope of the Appalachians. So they distilled in Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, North Georgia, which all have pretty questionable climates. And they all sit upon a big limestone shelf, just like Kentucky does. So they all benefit from the water and the climate, which most people say is what makes Kentucky bourbon so great. But I was thinking about it, and as people were distilling their corn, they were all drinking it right off the still. They were drinking it like vodka or gin. The thought of aging it never occurred to anyone.
It was a clear spirit.
It was a clear spirit, absolutely. And the only reason they put it in barrels is because that was the only thing that would hold liquid. And the only reason they charged it is because it was holding nails and soap and fish and what have you. And so they would char the barrel, 1, to make sure that it was going to hold liquid, and 2, to get rid of the taste of anything else that was in there. So it wasn't until the whiskey started on this journey that it transformed into bourbon. And that was kind of my hypothesis and why I thought, I've got a great idea. Let's reenact how this was done. And then I started digging into it and found what a pain in the ass. I had no idea what I was getting into.
So you're trying to do it in a historically accurate way as well, as we take a look at our first slide, because the season is important, right? The harvest happens, and then you have to get past the spring flood season before you can take to the river, the Ohio, and then the Mississippi to get it down to New Orleans. So this project launched June 7th after that flood season of 2016, and this is boat number one.
This is boat number one. So we actually distilled the product right here in Crestwood, Kentucky, Kentucky Artisan Distillery, in January of 2016. So again, trying to be as historically accurate as possible. We distilled it here as the farmers would have done it back then in the winter. And then they had a very small window of when there was enough water to run the rapids of the Ohio, but not too much water that they would be destroyed by big floodwaters. So we waited until June 7th to embark from here in Louisville. And as much as I wanted to do this entire journey by myself, I didn't have what turned out to be a full year to take off to embark on this. So I set out to find somebody that I thought was capable and had the time to go take off on this journey. Found this great young man named Ted Gray, who told me he was an Eagle Scout. He had built a flat boat as an Eagle Scout, and 4 of them maneuvered it along the river for 1 mile, and said, talked about how difficult that was, and had told me that he had taken a sailboat down the Tom Bigby waterway. Well, we loaded up those barrels and put them out on the river, had him go gas up, and then he tied off on the dock in the river. And having a current we do on the Ohio, you got to tie up on 4 points. I came to meet him at the dock, and he had tied up on the downriver side of it, and they almost sank the boat right away, and it was getting pounded into it. A friend of mine, Brian Arnett, who's here, sold us that boat, and we watched him depart, and both of us were shaking our heads saying, he's never going to make it. We're in trouble. And he'd never been through locks before.
Went through 32 of them.
32 locks along the way. He might not have known what he was doing when he took off, but he sure as hell did by the time he landed in New Orleans.
And I understand he became a bit of a rock star along the way, right?
He did, yeah, absolutely. He was kind of cool. It reminded me of Tom Hanks in Castaway. He started talking to the barrels. We named the 2 barrels. I'm on a boat from the song I'm on a Boat, and the other one, Fantastic Voyage from the song. And he started talking to him, specifically Fantastic Voyage became his buddy. He's on the river for 58 days. He averaged 4.8 knots. And as he would go through the locks, or as he was basically floating the river down, lots of boats, barges would pass him, and they see a couple barrels and cages, and they wanted to know what it was. So he would tell them what was going on. And so when he would come into a marina at night, they were waiting for him, and he became a little rock star along the way. And so I made sure I loaded him up with a lot of finished goods, so pre-bottled product.
So he didn't get into the barrel.
Into it. Exactly. But he had some friends along the way. He said that bees would come out in the middle of the river. They could smell what was going on there, and they would attach themselves, and he had different critters when he would wake up that would be, latched onto the barrels.
So first stop that you meet him is in New Orleans?
First stop was in New Orleans. So
I'm sorry. This is briefly, and I'm sorry. You got this whole idea about aging on water from the Ocean product that some people are very familiar with, very, very popular brand, with Mayor Fisher's brother.
Correct.
You're out watching this happen. They're on a boat. Is it off the coast of Costa Rica?
Yeah, we were off the coast of Costa Rica. We were
drinking bourbon while shark watching.
Well, we were trying to catch sharks. We were trying to fish. I was trying to surf, being from Kentucky, not so good at that. But we were pretty successful at drinking a lot of bourbon. And I would watch the bourbon doing this in the bottle. thought, if this was happening in a bottle, it certainly would happen in a barrel. And if it would happen in a barrel, it would force the maturation process in a different way. Instead of sitting on its side in Kentucky and waiting for the change of climate to expand the molecules and contrast the molecules to push the whiskey in and out of the wood, this was going to force it. And so I suggested to Chris, let's put some barrels on a ship, which he suggested, that's not really a good idea. I've got a crew catching great white sharks. But the more he drank, he came up with a hell of an idea. Let's put some barrels on a ship. And that's what we did.
So there's your stop in New Orleans where you ran into weather you had no idea at the time. Weather would be a major player, which makes me think about history and 150 years ago and how they survived these kind of storms on a flatboat. But it was the first tropical storm in New Orleans where the entire state gets flooded out.
Absolutely.
And the barrels are starting to get jeopardized by that.
By that time, it took us 58 days to get there. We had a landing party and tasted the product. And then we loaded the 2 barrels onto Chef John Besh's boat, Wee Chef. And we tried to take off. There were 7-foot swells, so we basically got out of the port, came right back in, thinking we'd have to wait a day or two. And this tropical storm encircled New Orleans and flooded out the state for 5 straight days. So it took us another 8 days before we took off. But to your point, these barrels were getting pounded. Along the way, we had 7 straight days of 100-plus degree temperatures on our way down to New Orleans. You know, down there, every night you get a 5 o'clock shower. That sun starts baking that rain off the barrel heads, and it starts really playing and manipulating the staves within the barrel.
So you mentioned that you tasted it for the first time. Was
Tasted
that
it.
your first idea that I'm onto something? Did it age better than
It already
58?
had. In
Yeah.
those 60 days, it was dark as an 8-year-old bourbon. And it had really taken on viscosity that you don't get from a young bourbon like that. And it started to really mellow out. One of the things that happens besides picking up color and flavor from the barrel when it's slapping against the wood like that, that wood acts as a filter and takes out the astringency of the alcohol. So it was really easy drinking. You could still tell it was young, but it was so much easier drinking than something that went into the barrel at 110 proof should be.
Yeah. And did you draw some off? And that,
Oh yeah, we pulled.
Not just for your tasting, you drew off a couple.
We've got some in the archives right now.
Okay.
From that first tasting, and we knew we were onto something at that point.
And you can see, I didn't look at this the first 4 or 5 times I looked at this picture, but you can see all the debris in the water there with some indication that storms are here. So next stop is Florida.
Tampa Bay.
Tampa Bay area.
We got the boat to Tampa Bay, and just in time, Hurricane Joaquin was coming up. So we got it into Tampa Bay, battened down, and then Hurricane Joaquin, it hit a little bit north. It hit right in the elbow of Florida, and again, knocked the hell out of the barrels. So when we came, as you see this cage, which Steve Thompson, who's here, he made for us, so we could secure the barrels, but 2, move them from one boat to the other. We had them within it, and we had these covers on them, and we took the covers off, and these barrel heads had completely warped. And I think you can see I'm trying to cooper it on the fly right here. That's where some of the staves had popped there, and this one kind of disintegrated in my hand. I'm not a very good cooper, as it turns out. So bad at it, actually, that we actually sent barrel heads down and screwed it on top of the barrel at that point. So we had it kind of fastened on well enough to take off and head down to Key West. And that was an adventure in its own. Chef John Besh had plenty of alcohol on the ship. We, I think, departed at 7:30. First beer cracked at 8:15.
This is out of Tampa and on the way to Key West here,
On the way to Key West.
Look at those barrels.
Safety, yeah, you can tell such a difference since we took off. And that's, less than 90 days at that point. But safety first, we would not drink hard liquor until we got in sight of land. So by the time we did see land, we saw Key West, and we're like, let's keep going, let's go to Cuba. And then somebody had the sense to think, maybe it's not a good idea to arrive in Havana with a couple bootlegged barrels at the time. So this is us with sea legs at best, trying to get these barrels off.
Is this a Is this in a Coast Guard manual or anything? No hard liquor until you see land?
I think it's chapter 1. Chapter 1. Your rations plus, but not until you see land. So we got to Key West. By that time, I knew these barrels. I didn't think they were going to make it. Actually, on our first ocean journey, which I put Newfill bourbon onto a ship, and it was out at sea for 3.5 years. After 2 years, I got a call from Chris, and he was out in the Guadalupe Island chain, which is 1,200 nautical miles southwest of San Diego. He said, Trey, I've got some bad news for you. 2 of the barrels, the bands had corroded and burst. That may have been the case. I also know the crew, so maybe it was a little bit of both.
It's all gone somewhere or another.
So one of the crewmen who knew that those barrels really well was named Juan, so I called that Juan Share. So trying to avoid Juan Share once again, we sent new barrels with galvanized steel bands on it this time down to Key West. And after that big day on the way down to Key West, I had to siphon the contents of 2 barrels into 2 new barrels. And so I tasted quite a bit of it.
We'll see some of your siphoning work here coming up a little bit in the program.
I got pretty good at it.
Not knowing at the time that Hurricane Matthew was in your near future, which is like the largest Cat 5 since like 2008.
So we actually, if you go back to that last slide, we put the barrels in Key West on my cousin's friend's 26-foot center console and ran that up to Key West in a day because we were trying to hurry to get in before Hurricane Matthew hit. I actually spent the day 8 hours of holding on to the side of the Bimini and at 40 plus knots, just getting pounded. I couldn't walk for 2 days after that. But we all floated the barrels there into a boathouse and waited for Hurricane Matthew to come through. Unbeknownst to us, Hurricane Matthew had already destroyed the boat that was coming over from the BVIs to pick the barrels up in Key West and Fort Lauderdale and take it up to New York on the rest of the voyage.
Boat's gone, but you saved the barrels.
Saved the barrels. So, saved the barrels. It wintered, not a bad life. It spent the winter in a boathouse in Fort Lauderdale. So it was up on one of those stackable boat racks, up on the 5th rack. And so again, was able to age and get all that heat within that time. So from the time it hit New Orleans, which was in August, I think it was August 8th, and all the way until it landed, it's on the coast. So one of my theories was it was going to taste very similar to Jefferson's Ocean. So it was breathing in that salt air that entire time. So as we're wintering in Fort Lauderdale, thinking, how are we going to get these barrels up to New York, which was our final destination, we came across an organization called the Great Loopers, which, are you a looper? Yeah. All right. So loopers are, when I grew up, this is what I want to do. They take the route that we're talking about. Let's say we start in New Orleans, go the intercoastal out onto open water when weather is advisable, down around the Straits of Florida, up into New York, up the Hudson, into the Great Lakes, down through Chicago, back down onto the Ohio, down the Tombigbee, and back through, which is the Great Loop. So there is an organization that I found, and they put it out through their crew. Does anybody want to pick up some barrels? And believe it or not, it wasn't that hard to find people that wanted to put a couple barrels of bourbon. You tried? Yeah. So we found this wonderful couple, Charles and Joyce Thurham, that had this boat. Unbelievably, the boat brand is named Jefferson. That I think top speed is 12 knots. Sometimes it battles, like on the St. Lawrence, it battles to have enough speed to make it past the currents. But they said, well, we'll find some room for it. So as we were trying to figure out where we were going to put it, because this is their home that they live on, the only place that had room for it was on top of the roof of the boat, which was a walking billboard once again for it. And they had more damn fun with it than anybody, and which was great. So they leisurely took their time up to head to New York, which was fine. The more time on the water, the better the aging.
The whole process makes me keep thinking back to history and 150 years ago when there were pirates along waterways and all commerce was happening down the Mississippi to New Orleans. How did they survive?
It gave me so much respect for that. So, as they did it, they were on flatboats, which are, it takes 4 people to navigate one of those things. And through the currents, we went down the Tom Bigby waterway. We did not go down the Mississippi, one, because it's illegal to have pleasure crash south of, or downriver of Baton Rouge, and there's no fuel stops either. But it's very dangerous. And that one, you had pirates that you had to worry about. When you got to New Orleans, a lot of people, you traded that bourbon for gold. So if it wasn't your son or most trusted partners, a lot of them took that gold and they were gone. When they did get it, they either walked back the Natchez Trace to Louisville, which took months and months and months, or they traded some of that gold for horses, and some people say that was the start of the thoroughbred industry here in Kentucky. There's a lot to this. This is the history not only of Kentucky, but of America. And what they went through, and there were pirates on the rivers. There were bandits. As soon as they got that gold walking back, they knew what they had. They could disappear. Or, if they traveled on and went on the ship, I didn't have, my Cooper skills, as you can see, weren't very good. I had the benefit of FedExing a couple barrels down to Key West. That wasn't an option back then. We had the benefit of weeks of knowledge before the hurricanes were going to hit. What did they have, and how did they protect themselves in there? So it's an amazing thing, but it proved it had to be worth it, because they did it year after year until the railroad came, until the steamships came, and it had to be profitable, and the people up on the eastern seaboard had to be willing to pay such a premium that it was worth this expensive, treacherous journey.
And you know what they did with those flatboats when they got to New Orleans? What are you going to do with all that wood? Made houses.
Made houses.
They made row houses. That's exactly
most of the
right.
row houses in New Orleans, that's where they came from. That's where the wood came from.
All right, so we have one more leg at this point.
Yeah.
Who's that guy?
Somebody that was just happy that it was coming to an end and that there was still liquid in the barrels, because I didn't know if it would be.
And there's proof that there's still liquid in the barrels.
There still is, and you can see where we tapped into it.
Are you so happy there because you realize your hypothesis it rings true now? Or were you
There's a couple things. One, it was, and as soon as we got into it, I knew that no doubt whiskey turned into bourbon for that first time. It transformed on that voyage. And the reason they wanted bourbon from Kentucky, and the distillers in Kentucky, in my mind, had no idea at the time what their whiskey tasted like by the time it hit the eastern seaboard. They're like, why are these people paying this much for this whiskey? They finally figured it out, but it wasn't until that bourbon made that journey that they really figured out what that whiskey was all about. And it wasn't, it was just, all of this was practicality and necessity. And that's why the tradition of bourbon has really stayed true to itself so long. I'm looking at a lot of different things right now and questioning, okay, this has worked, and Kentucky's turned out to be a wonderful place to age, but is it the end-all be-all? And if you change the agitation in the environment, how is it going to change the liquid? And it makes a difference. And when we tapped into this barrel for the first time, we were launching our Jefferson's Presidential Select, a 16-year-old bourbon that had been double-barreled for 5 years. And the whiskey coming out of there, which was 18 months old, was every bit as dark as that 16-year-old bourbon. And it was smoother. I could still taste that it was young, but it was easier drinking.
That explains the look on your face.
There you go.
All right, here it's time to siphon some off, and I'll be quiet so you can listen to the conversation here, because Trey's good at a lot of things.
Get the
but
transfer,
getting things
slow-mo?
into one bottle
Getting the
and
transfer.
another. Well,
Slow-mo?
it's best.
Oh, you want to be in fast mode.
Yeah, I want to be in fast.
That wasn't so bad.
You're a rookie at that. That's wasting too much.
Evidently I am.
18-month-old
I
bourbon.
mean,
How dark
I'll
that
do
is.
the next one.
All
I'll show
right.
you how it should be done.
You've never heard that before, have you?
That is amazing. That color is not
How to do it proper.
representative. So here, your second time through with a little instruction, you improved your game.
Those don't look like
You're
my
about to
hands.
go.
I think somebody with a steadier hand
Yeah.
did that right there. Oh.
So you got to tilt it to
Yeah.
get it closer.
Well
so you don't
done.
jump the gap there, That's at least 17 drops. That was a
All
lot.
right. So what we're going to have the opportunity to do now is to taste one product that was aged in Kentucky at Kentucky Artisan Distillery. And I don't want you to finish that product because I want you to be able to taste them side by side. But we're gonna try that one first. This is the Kentucky age, and it's on a spot on your tasting mat there. Same distillate, it's the exact same product, just aged differently.
Now, what this is what we're making out of Kentucky Artisan Distillery. I think we've got Jade, our distiller, out here, and Steve Thompson, who put it together with some pretty unique stills, some historic stills, and our grain that's grown right at the farm that butts up to us. But this is a very high rye bourbon, so you're going to get a lot of spice out of it, and it's very young. So this is 18-month-old bourbon. It's 36% rye, and it was put into the barrel at 110 proof. I believe we've got this cut down to 92 right now. But you're going to taste this.
What's it say on your bottles? Is it 92?
You're going to taste this, and it's young. It's going to get there with enough age. But it's spicy, it's grassy.
It tastes like a great young bourbon.
Tastes like a great young bourbon. Yeah. You get a lot of the stringency that's associated with a young bourbon. Grassy. Now,
We're going to get there.
We'll get to
Tell
that.
me about your son.
Well, here, let's drink this. I'll tell you about
You want
that.
to drink it first? All right. Let's go side by side then.
So, if you look at this one, it's, you can tell the color's that much more than you saw in the first one. And the reason it's not the same color as what was siphoned out is it's been cut from 100 and I think it came out of the barrel at 117 proof. So during that voyage, the water actually evaporated off first, and that doesn't always happen. Depending on where it's aging, you either have the alcohol or the water evaporating off first, which will either increase or decrease the entry proof. But much richer. You're going to see it. You can even take a look, and you'll see. I think
Flags are
viscosity
different.
explains
Yeah.
it quite a bit. It's going to be a lot thicker. It's going to hit your tongue. I think just the weight on this bourbon is so much different. It's almost syrupy in texture.
So this is what every bourbon distiller wants to do, essentially, is to speed up the process, right? Nobody wants to wait 15 years for a great bourbon. If you can find a way to do it quicker.
Time value of money. You got your money tied up for that long, that's very expensive. So this is one way that it happens. So you get a lot of flavors coming from the wood. When we sent the ocean barrels originally, we sent them back to be broken down and reverse engineered basically by the Cooperage Independent Stave Company. And they've never seen any barrel, and they've got cooperages all over the world. They've never seen barrels that have the sugars have caramelized so much in it. And it's when you're exposed to all that heat, that's what's going on. You're caramelizing the sugar. That's why you get so much caramel out of here. I get a lot of honey out of here that I really wouldn't expect in a bourbon. I still get a little graininess on it, so you can still tell it's young, but notice how easy it goes down.
What do you think? Yeah, yay? Yay? Applause are fine?
Yeah. Is there a noticeable difference between the Kentucky aged and the Journey bourbon? Absolutely. Yeah. Huge. And so it was about this time that people thought, well, three things happened. First, the advent of the steam engine, which first distillers were still taking the barrels downriver via flatboats, but they were bringing the captains back up via the steamship, which shortened the journey immensely. And then they started taking barrels downriver. And then eventually the railroad came, which made this process, as slow as it was, as costly as it was, obsolete. And then obviously interstate. So what the distillers decided that they needed to do to emulate this was put it down for many years. And that's why aging for as long as it did and where it did, because you want to age it next to where you make it because it's practical. Anytime you move this stuff, there's a cost associated with it. So they started building rickhouses next to the distilleries because that was practical. So that is why bourbon is aged for the time that it's aged, and that's why it goes up to the processes to try to emulate to where it first came from, so the populace of the United States in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore would continue to buy Kentucky bourbon, and that's what's happened.
So that begs the question, now you've figured this out, in a year's time you can turn, a bourbon from a 1 year, 18-month bourbon into an 8-year bourbon or close to that taste profile. How do you take that to scale now?
Well, we were hoping to launch this as we were going to do this on a commercial venture, and we were going to load barrels right out the back door onto a barge right now. But we got a little problem with the government shutdown and the TTB, which is going to take us a little longer than we expected.
The journey starts here at the Frazier History Museum.
Will start here, and we will do this on a commercial basis, and we'll be able to bring you bourbon that has gone on this route or a very similar route to show you what bourbon was all about back then.
This journey, like all journeys, is a story, right? And it's experiences, and you've had great experience, met great people along the way. A couple of these pictures are a representation of that.
So one of the things that I've found is changing the environment, the climate, the agitation changes the outcome of the bourbon. So I, self-indulgent, one thing that I like to do is duck hunt. And I've got some friends with some pretty nice duck hunting properties. One on the eastern shore of Virginia where my son and I dropped a barrel off into the marsh and to the woods. Another one in the Delta and Mississippi into a duck blind, at which I just took Food and Wine magazine to go tap into those barrels after it aged for 2 years. And again, this bourbon is much darker than it would have been in Kentucky and had mellowed much more than it would have in Kentucky. So I'm trying to find out where the best place to age, what's the best environment, and how to do it, that it's a little bit different. So everything that we've done to date, we are aging it, maturing it, distilling it in Kentucky first, and then adding things to it, like finishing it in different areas, because we always want to tip our hat and pay homage to what this great spirit has become, and why Kentucky is such a big part of it.
I want to give guests a chance to ask some questions of Trey, but first, how about a big round of applause for Trey Zoeller, folks?
Yes, it did.
And then the barge is to go to New Orleans?
That's correct.
Okay.
Well, we're still trying. The question was, so it did go to, we went down the Tom Bigby waterway, so it did come into Mobile Bay, but we also took it up or west on the intercoastal to New Orleans and then took it back. So we retraced that steps right there. So yeah, we're probably going to be able to take it down the Mississippi straight into New Orleans. Still working out details on it, but that's what will happen.
I guess
We
my
almost
question-
capsized in Mobile Bay. So did you? That shallow water makes for some pretty rough waves.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I guess my question is about our friends at the TTB. Were you bonded the whole way through, or did you pay excise earlier? And then, how did you oversee those barrels kind of floating around all this time with nobody around them?
Who asked that question? I can't see. Well,
Does it matter?
TTB
Who asked?
secret.
Is the government still shut down? Does he have to answer that question?
We had a special exemption from the TTB, but now that's what we are working through right now. But on that, we had a special exemption. It took us a while to get that. You had to go up high enough. Yes, sir. It's funny, yes, we're actually taking tall ships for the New Orleans Tricentennial. Actually, what was the name of the boat? Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm thinking it.
Your 4 boats?
The last boat that picks us up.
Insanity.
Insanity, yeah, Insanity.
I have notes in his defense.
The Insanity, on their second great loop, called me up and said, "Trey, we're coming through Kentucky again." I was like, "I'll bring you 2 barrels." So I trucked down 2 barrels to Kentucky Lake and we loaded it up, and they did the great loop yet again. So we've got those, and then we are working something out with the tall ships. We tried to get it done for the Tricentennial, but we've got a couple really cool. We finished some bourbon in Bordeaux Cabernet barrels, and we're working on bringing some ships from Bordeaux over. On the tall ship, they're really cool, yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Yes, sir.
All right, Trey, you've done a lot of cool journeys. What's the next journey for Jefferson's? When are you going to go to space?
Well,
Are you going to fund it?
SpaceX did actually, a company out of Lexington, Kentucky, believe it or not, called Space Tango, contacted me about probably 9 months ago, and we're working on putting 10 vials up in SpaceX. So the vials will have different wood chips at different aging periods, and so we'll have it in there. Will it do anything? I don't know, but it'll be kind of cool being in space and seeing if anything happens.
So on that, Trey, when you're saying vials, are you going to do something similar to the Kentucky Oak Project?
Well, we have done, you said vials? The Kentucky Oak Project, well, no, but I've got, we came out with a product recently called our Twinwood, which I've spent the last 6 years in hundreds of different experiments. One of the aha moments that I had, I went to Independent Stave Company's headquartered in Lebanon, Kentucky. And Independent Stave, for you who don't know, make 80% of the barrels for the bourbon industry. And I've been into their bourbon cooperages here in Lebanon, Kentucky many, many times. But I went to barrel camp and became a barrel chef for a few days. And I got to experience what they're doing with all types of barrels from cooperages all around the world for different wines and spirits. And instead of just doing a rudimentary char like we do for Kentucky, we experience seasoning, toasting, charring, grooves, all types of things. And so I've been working with different combinations of those for really the last 6 years and tasting them every 30 days and kind of charting them how they change. One specifically, you kind of follow a graph of temperature and time to evoke butterscotch flavors or vanilla flavors or mocha flavors. And there was one specifically, and I think it was a new bourbon. We took mature bourbon and put it into a new bourbon barrel with a wine head with a stave that had been seared, and then but what came out of it was a bourbon after 60 days that tastes like a butterscotch candy, like a Werther's candy. It was a butterscotch bomb, and I'm like, man, this is incredible at 60 days. At 90 days, it's going to be off the chart. At 90 days, it completely turned and tastes like green wood. So it was fun to chart these things, and so we're able to find out where that apex was in the aging process. Some of them got better for a while, then got worse, and they got better again. Some got worse and tailed off. Some of them continued to get better. So it's a combination of those, and it's kind of like peeling back the layer of an onion. The more you peel back and something works, you're like, well, if that works, why wouldn't this work? Let's try it. And a lot of them fall flat on their face and don't come out well at all, and others really blossom and do well. So that twin wood that we did, it was kind of the culmination of what I thought was the best barrel, and we had them make us some proprietary barrels based on those different characteristics. And I think we finished 10-year-old bourbon for 4 months, and it was outstanding.
Any other questions? Missy, would you like to come up? Missy Hillock from Chateau Bourbon, who has provided our food for the night. Thank you very much. She's going to tell us a little bit about their product and your opportunities to enjoy their facility.
It's Chateau Bourbon, Trey and Andy. It's not
Chateau
Chateau
Bourbon?
Bourbon.
Well, I mean, when you say chateau, I assume
I
you're
know,
going
but
French
we're,
on
we're
me.
in Kentucky. We're not that fancy.
It's for sales.
It's for
For
sale.
sales. It's not Versailles.
Did you say it was for sale?
Chateau Bourbon.
Chateau Bourbon is for sale?
Yeah. It's not for sale, no.
Well, hi, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the food tonight. Yay! I had some people ask me, who made this? I'm like, who do you think made this? I made it. So my husband John and I, John's in the back, we own Chateau Bourbon Bed and Breakfast in Norton Commons. And of course, we are an inn, so we host overnight guests, whether it be folks from out of town who are coming in to do the Bourbon Trail, or a lot of local people who want a little bit of a staycation, maybe to celebrate something special. So please check us out if you're looking for a great place to get away, whether it's yourself or your guests who are coming into town. And then, of course, a big part of a bed and breakfast is the food. And so we make a killer 3-course breakfast every morning that's bourbon infused. We also do a happy hour that's included in the stay that is a specialty bourbon cocktail and a bourbon infused dessert. So please come check us out. Norton Commons is a great little neighborhood here in Louisville. It's a new urbanist community, which means there are businesses and homes kind of all on one footprint. Everything's walkable. There are 10 local restaurants right in our neighborhood, lots of things to see and do. And then, of course, we're only 10 minutes from Kentucky Artisan Distillery. So we love to send folks there, as well as to the Frazier and other great Louisville sites while they're visiting us. So thank you so much, and we hope you have a great rest of the night.
Speaking of great husband-wife teams, Kelly and Forrest Ramsey are here. Would you, either of you, like to come up and talk about small batch bourbon truffles? They have an amazing art-eatable small batch bourbon truffles. Provides product and taste profiles for all the different distilleries, and they are right down the street. We brought them in just 2 doors down. They do an amazing job.
So my name is Forrest Ramsey. My wife Kelly is the genius behind Art Eatables. She is the world's first and only bourbon certified chocolatier. So what she does is pair bourbon and chocolate where you taste that spirit in the truffles. So the ones that we made tonight, I know not everybody got them. They tend to go fast. People tend to grab more than one. That's not a problem. But she did the Jefferson's Reserve bourbon tonight. But we make stuff for more distillers than everyone else in the state combined, and it's all based on Kelly's ability to pair bourbon and chocolate together. We have a store just a couple doors down here from the Frazier. We also have our original store down on 4th Street. So if you'd like to dodge construction, please come down and see us down there. So.
All right, folks, I hope you had an outstanding time tonight. Everybody have a good time? If you had fun, our next program is coming up on February 20th. It is a master series, and we'll be tasting some bourbons that are not available to the public. We'll be tasting Blood Oath from Lux Row, Blood Oath number 5, not yet released. We'll be tasting Ezra Brooks 7-Year, which was just voted best sipping whiskey by Fred Minnick. We will be tasting Yellowstone Straight Bourbon and Minor Case Rye, along with Gravely Brewing, a great local brewing company. We'll be here for that, so we're excited for that. There's also a March event with Angels Envy. If you'd like to buy any Jefferson's product tonight, Trey has agreed to sign your bottle. So we have, are there any left of the Journey? There are some Journey left? Limited Journey left in the back. Look, the only place you're ever going to buy this Journey in Kentucky aged is here and at Kentucky Artisan, and when it's gone, it's gone. So there are a few of those back. There are some Oceans in the back. There are some Jefferson Reserves in the back. So if you would like to buy those in the next half hour, Trey's been kind enough to agree to sign those for you. So thank you for being here. We appreciate you. How about one last big round of applause for Trey Zoeller?
Hey, thank you. Thank you all for coming. Hope you had fun.